Cool. Well, I'll go ahead and get started as folks are trickling in here. I wanted to kick off week 1 of the Manager Challenge program. We're 1 week down and 3 to go. And I think before we get started into the slides, I just wanted to really thank you all for volunteering to participate in the challenge. I know it's a bit of a time commitment, but as we grow and scale at GitLab, our manager enablement capabilities are only going to increase, and this is really a start. So your feedback and your perspective is really, really going to be useful as we iterate on future sessions. And I also, too, I wanted to caveat real quick before we dive into the content regarding managing underperformance using social styles is, social styles is just a framework. It's just a model to be able to assess other people's behavior. It's not, you don't have to be typecasted into a specific style forever, right? And because I'm an expressive doesn't mean I display driver or, amiable or analytical qualities. So I just wanted to get that out there before we go deeper. And another thing, the copyright, the trademark, if you see social styles capitalized, that's the reason, because of the Tracom Corporation who put it together. All right, so some quick ground rules. I think I know multitasking is the name of the game here at GitLab, but I think for learning, it doesn't always necessarily apply. So I'll try to go through these slides really fast. I think the benefit of a program like this is being able to hear from others. So try to give your full attention, try to close other backgrounds, be prepared to collaborate, and kind of mute Slack. We don't want to be like we're back in high school where we're in the back of the classroom on our phones, not paying attention. So without further ado, in this session, we're just going to explore some strategies to create a workplace culture of accountability that builds trust. We're going to build on utilizing social styles to practice difficult conversations with team members, and we're going to apply strategies to address underperformance with team members as soon as it is identified. I also, before we dive deeper, I wanted to give a quick shout out to Mr. Sam Beckham for creating that awesome app in terms of up-leveling the PDF for the social styles assessment. So thank you, Sam. It looks really awesome. Okay. So if everybody could go to menti.com and enter the code 7722611, we're gonna do some fun interactive questions here. And if you could answer the question, what is the hardest part about having difficult conversations with team members at GitLab? And this is all anonymous.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Thanks, Tracy.
Remoteness, expectations, keep them coming. Not knowing them, yep, that's a big one. Unknown reactions, love it. Communication gaps, hurt feelings, not in person. Yeah, these are all definitely things that I've struggled with as well. Trust. Emotional responses. Cool, these are awesome. These are really great. And I think a lot of these, follow, really a similar theme that we're gonna try to hit on in this live learning session with social styles. And that's really around building trust, getting to know folks on a personal and a professional level to break down those barriers. Awesome, let me go back to slides here. So hopefully at this point, everybody has had the opportunity to take the social styles assessment. If not, that's okay. You can go back and do it. But as you know, social styles is a framework. It's just a model. It's not intended to typecast anybody, but, it's based off of behavioral, drivers. So there's kind of 4 different styles: analytical, driving, amiable, and expressive. And we're going to dive deeper into the social styles model a little bit more. And I think, one thing about social styles that I think is different than other assessments is that it really focuses on observable behaviors. And I want to stress that point. And it's not so much about personality, it's about observable behaviors. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on. But it's used by corporations worldwide, and it's really a tool to help strengthen relationship, improve communication. It can help predict behavior based off of those observable behaviors that you may pick up on. And, I think for all of us as leaders, as managers, a key management principle is, the more you understand your people, the more critical it can be to management and professional success. So keep that in mind as we move along. All right, so I talked a lot about observable behaviors, and I like to use the analogy of a pie. So hopefully everybody out here has had pie before. If not, that's okay. I'm a big apple pie guy myself. And if you look at a pie, there's a crust and then there's a filling. Now on the outside of the pie is the crust, and that's what you can see. Consider that your observable behaviors. That's kind of how others maybe perceive you, how you come across, how you interact with people and settings. And deep down, that filling is your personality. So kind of who you are as a person to your core. Now, personality in the workplace can sometimes take longer to develop amongst your team members. I know for me, for example, like getting to know me on a really deep personal level is going to take a long time just because we all go through different things in our life. But my observable behaviors, the way I'm talking, I'm using my hands, I'm pretty animated, so I'm very expressive. And you can usually pick that up the first time you talk to me. And then in the social styles model, there's, kind of two scales of behavior. There's assertiveness and responsiveness. Now on the model, if you're more on the right, you're more of a tell. So you might be a little bit more active. You might be a little bit more direct. You might challenge. And then if you're on the left side, you're maybe a little bit more reserved, easygoing, you're tentative. You might ask questions. And then the other scale of behavior is responsiveness. So if you're on the higher end of the scale, you might be control. And if you're on the lower end, you might be more emote. And your verbal versus nonverbal behaviors, maybe if you're more on the control end, you might be a little bit more controlled in your facial expression. You might be a little bit more rigid in your body posture. You might use your hands less, and you might be a little bit more monotone in speech. Again, these are all just based off of research. It's not intended to put anybody in a box. I know for me, like I've had conversations with folks at GitLab that maybe are a little bit more rigid and a little bit more controlled, and that's because of their social style. It's not anything that I need to take personally. So when we put those two things together, we get our social styles model. And what I love about social styles is that, it breaks up individuals and team members into 4 categories: analytical, driving, amiable, and expressive. And, I think social styles give some actual tangible steps on, what somebody may encounter on their best day and on their worst day. And all of this is outlined in the handbook, but it's really a tactical tool we can implement as soon as we know somebody's style. So let's take analytical, for example. I can guarantee at GitLab, there's probably a lot of analytical social styles. If I have a meeting with somebody who tends to be a little bit more analytical, I'm going to shape the meeting a little bit differently because I know they're going to want to get straight down to business. They're going to want to stick to facts. It might be a little bit more historical time frame. They want to see the details and the data. Me as an expressive, I want to spend the first 5 or 10 minutes of a meeting getting to know that person, talking about their weekend. And it's not to say that analytical versus expressive or vice versa or any of the styles can't have those conversations, but it's just something to have in mind if you're having a conversation with somebody with a different style. And what I also love about social styles is that it gives you kind of some tangible steps to take if you are working with an analytical style. I think me having meetings with somebody who's more analytical, like I said earlier, I'm going to keep the meeting short. I'm going to be really respectful. I'm going to stick to data and facts. And, I'm going to craft my communication style based off of their social style. And that's really the key tenet of styles. All right. So I think we're all probably wondering, and based on the challenges before, how does social styles relate to managing underperformance? And I think underperformance as a manager is probably one of the more difficult conversations to bring up as a leader. And, I think underperformance, the more we can get to know each other and the more we can identify our individual strengths and area for development, the easier it can be to have those types of conversations. And, I think we need to, if we have an underperforming team member, we need to ask ourselves, why is that individual underperforming? And, there may be a lot of reasons. There may be a lack of growth, a lack of variety, a lack of communication, lack of trust. When I look back on my career and I think about underperformance, it's usually because I haven't built that relationship with the manager, with my leader yet. I haven't broken down those barriers. I haven't really gotten some concrete steps from them, not to put the blame on the manager, on how to do my job effectively. That's not the only reason for underperformance, but I can guarantee that that's probably a pretty wide percentage. So let me open up this quick little video that we put together. It's kind of bringing to life social styles. Cool. Well, hopefully everybody enjoyed that as much as I did putting it together. And there's some additional insights here on this page, just to, if a driver is dealing with an analytical and an analytical dealing with the driver, just with some strategies that you could go in to having a potential difficult conversations that you could apply in your communication style. So, we've got this awesome underperformance handbook page that you can reference in terms of the process of addressing underperformance. But, what if the underperformance continues if you get to this point? And I think it's important to really have, coaching conversations and document the outcomes in a Google Doc. Coaching is going to be the theme of the challenges next week, and we'll dive deeper into that, but continuing to help that team member, grow and resolve the underperformance. It's also really important to notify your people business partner as soon as the underperformance persists and keep them in the loop throughout the process. I know we have some PVPs on this call, so it'll be great to hear their perspective as well. If you need to escalate, it's important to create a written warning to bring attention to new or ongoing deficiencies in conduct. And then from there, it's, consider a personal enablement plan if coaching and the written warning is not enough. I think sometimes at GitLab, like, the personal enablement plan may be viewed as negative, but it's really a positive way to help reinforce and help prepare that team member forward if the underperformance continues, with concrete steps on how to get better. Lastly, if that doesn't work, escalate to a performance improvement plan as a last chance to resolve. And if the PIP doesn't work, the last resort would be offboarding, unfortunately. So I think, if we put it all together, like I said, I wanted to go through these slides pretty fast. Social styles is really a tool that you can use as a manager to get to know your team members. There are a ton of personality and behavioral assessments out there. Again, I think social styles is great because it focuses on observable versus personality. I think it's easier to remember other people's styles versus say their Myers-Briggs personality types. I don't think I know anybody's off the top of my head. And, you know, it really reinforces the more we know about our team members' unique strengths and areas of development, the more fluid it can be to have difficult conversations. And lastly, just addressing that underperformance needs to be addressed as early as possible. All right, so it's enough of me talking. I think next we're just gonna go into fun scenarios, and this is where the fun starts. So I hope everybody is excited to do some breakout activities and do some role playing. And this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna break out into groups of 3 via Zoom for a 15-minute breakout activity. That will be random, randomly selected. If you're an odd number group, if you could take the first scenario, and if you're an even number group, if you could take the second. Use this time to introduce one another in the Zoom pod, share your styles, get to know one another. Being a part of this challenge pilot, you're part of this unique cohort of manager enablement. So get to know one another. And then role play the scenario as if this is a one-to-one conversation between a team member and a manager, while the third team member is kind of providing feedback and coaching following a scenario. If there's more time, you can rotate roles. There's some slides in here, slides 23 and 24, you can apply as resources. There's also some slides in the appendix. And then ask yourself, how should you address the underperformance, and how can you use social styles to frame the combo? And then we'll come back as a group after 15 minutes, and we will share as a group. So is anybody interested in sharing like group 1, scenario 1?
Yeah, so I was the person giving the feedback. Sam and Justin, you're welcome to chime in anytime. But we went through the role play once. We didn't have opportunity to go through it again. And I think the only difficulty that we had was everybody assuming a social style that wasn't aligned to what their actual social style is. So for instance, Sam is amiable, and the scenario called for him to be in a driver style. And I think he did phenomenally. The only feedback I really had for him was just to create a bit more structure for the team member, potentially offering them insights into how to structure their day and how to block time off to do certain tasks, and offering a mentor or a buddy that could support their settling in process, because it is a relatively new team member.
That's a great point, like especially around the having role-playing social style that's not your own, may be very difficult. So I didn't even think of that. So thanks.
I think it's great because it speaks to the need for versatility. So
Right.
Even though it was uncomfortable and unnatural, it sort of prompted that aspect of it.
Yeah, that's great. That's definitely critical, being versatile and adapting your style to others. Cool. Anything else for group 1? Anybody wants to share? We can move on to group 2. That was around the sales scenario for underperformance.
Yeah, so Nadia and David and I were group 2. So I was the manager and Nadia was the underperforming team member. And I think David provided us with really great feedback. So maybe David, you can speak a bit to that.
It was lots of good examples of taking into account of the approaches, not only from the manager side, but thinking about not only the individual contributor side, but also how the individual contributor would respond, knowing what the manager's style was. So I think we had a good discussion of, do you start immediately out of the gate with saying, look, this is what the conversation is about, we need to talk about underperformance, and then go to compliment, or do you start out with complimenting and then go directly to the underperformance? So we talked a little bit about that, but I thought the team did a really good job of being direct and short and sweet, not having too much detail, and agreeing to, all right, these are the next steps. one other thing we talked about was just pausing, once we're going to lay out the complement of the skills that person has, but then talk about the facts of the underperformance, pausing to ask for the individual contributor's perspective, right? So just you get a chance to see what their side of the story is.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think just giving everybody a voice, in that meeting is really important. And I love the fact that, if you're giving feedback to an expressive, do you jump right into it, or do you like compliment them first? You give them a little bit of feedback on what's going well, and then you dive into more of the facts around the underperformance. So awesome.
We had a different approach. I put it in the chat too, but just to say, we started our session with kind of seeking to understand, just kind of like a personal check-in. Hey, how are things going? It's like, how are you? People have kids at home. People are, we live in a crazy world right now. There's fire. California's on fire. And it's like, hey, so, how are you? And then trying to feel out, like, are they self-aware of the underperformance or not? And then acting accordingly. You can either present facts, give specific feedback, and then kind of tee up the conversation, but really just to give them a chance to say, yeah, gosh, I know things have been difficult, not going well lately because blah, 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 blah. And then you can come up with a plan to, course correct.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think you always want to account for things that may be happening outside of a team member's in their personal life, fires with COVID, with personal tragedy. I think always reflecting on that and making sure, everyone's doing okay personally and professionally. So awesome. All right, group 3.
I was in group 3. That was scenario 1. And Kike and Candace were also in my group. One of the things that we talked about was that it often takes team members time to process. So our approach was, my approach as the manager was to offer kind of like a coaching opportunity for this team member. Since they were Underperform style, they'd probably appreciate having kind of a pair programming approach. But we talked about how either you need to walk into that meeting with the details so that when those secondary questions come up maybe after the conversation, the team member has answers to them, or you need to make sure that the team member understands that you're available. Because we talked about Kike's response went kind of first to, okay, I've accepted that there's a problem. Now tell me exactly what I need to do to fix it. And there are probably a number of questions that will come up later about, well, exactly how does that problem surface and what does it mean for me long term, and am I on a PIP, and those kinds of things that we skipped over, but we'll probably come back to.
Yeah, and just like having the coaching conversation, do you find that to be like a useful approach in kind of your day-to-day management, style, like currently at GitLab?
I mentioned that whenever I have difficult conversations, I do typically end with that, hey, I imagine there will be more questions that come up. I am here and available to chat with you. I'm just a Slack message or text or whatever it is. The thing that I said was typically team members, if they don't have or if they end up with a question, they will kind of spiral into thinking it's the worst situation. And I tell them, interrupting me or reaching out to me or any other leader is well worth limiting your stress, right? Like if it means you're not stressed for 5 hours and you ping me offline in order to answer a question quickly, that is more important to me. So yeah, although I think in our discussion, Kike and Candace were highlighting, it would be better to walk in with more of those answers. I'm just not sure if team members are prepared to listen to them and understand them in the midst of that conversation.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think as long as like your team members know that you're there for them, and you can have those coaching conversations that especially if you have like examples from their work to show them in the call, it's really important. Cool. Group 4, I think we're on.
All right. So I was in the group with Rebecca and John, and we had the second scenario. We discussed a lot of the things that group 2 had mentioned. we had discussed just starting with some positive feedback, given the expressive social style. We thought, you know, this Jamal likes to be recognized, needs recognition. So maybe that would help ground the conversation in less emotional reaction in terms of giving him some additional feedback on how he's doing from a data perspective. And then we also talked a lot about, given that the expressive style is mostly unstructured, how we might be able to help put some structure in place for Jamal, and also discuss with him and point him to more of like the overall goal or the vision, with needing him to really dive deeper into understanding his quota misses, and really dive deeper into understanding kind of the gaps that he has with the knowledge of the GitLab product. Another thing that we had also discussed was really, since he probably is more geared towards feelings versus data, having him translate some of those feelings, because in sales, sometimes the feelings are actually data on whether a customer is willing to buy or is primed for buying. So having him really kind of understand how his connections to feelings are actually really data, and how, you know, that is critical to his success in the role. So those are just some additional things that we had discussed on top of what Group 2 shared.
Well, that's great. And would you say, just from your experience in supporting, you know, the sales audience, that a lot of sellers maybe display more expressive types of style?
100%, yes. And just because GitLab as a company is so data focused and data driven, I think that sometimes is a gap that for folks here, in terms of, you know, how do we translate their strengths into what we need from a data perspective as a company to grow and potentially understand predictability within our business. So that is something I think that the managers are constantly working on with the team. I don't know if David Summers or Chris has anything additional to offer on that point.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Carolyn. All right, next group. I think we're on Group 5. Yep.
I feel like I totally jumped the queue.
No, it's okay. There's throw it out there.
Stephen, did you have anything to add to my little monologue earlier?
That's right. Yeah, I think we also talked about the idea of, hey, the manager was a driver in our scenario, and you know the inclination for a driver would be to come with this long list of things that you're underperforming on and metrics to kind of back it up, whereas the person receiving it was amiable. And so Chris kind of discussed like, hey, starting off with like, hey, how are things going? You know, how are you feeling? Is there anything we should be aware of? And the idea of sort of tailoring the message initially based on the scenario, and not just coming up immediately with like, hey, here's this list of all the things that you're not doing well. I think Kenny kind of touched on it as well. Like that initial conversation can be very jarring for people who aren't self-aware that maybe there's an issue. And so the idea of, you know, kind of taking someone's temperature a little bit ahead of time, and then, you know, adjusting course like Chris mentioned, to resolve it based on what you discover.
No, that's great. I think, you know, and any sort of engagement you have with team members, taking the temperature all the time is really a good best practice to implement. Just kind of see how folks are doing and just how they're doing with producing results. So
yeah, the one-on-ones I think are super important for that sort of ongoing, because then you notice quickly like when there's a change.
For sure. Awesome. And I think we're at the last group, I believe, in Group 6.
Yes, from Group 6, Ramya and Nadia, not Nadia was in my team. Ramya played the manager role, because Nadia was a team member. We started the conversation with just asking how the person is doing and how are they feeling, how is the pandemic impacting them. And the team member came back with how is the pandemic has impacted them a lot with everything going on. They're definitely stressed out. This could be taken as a way of them trying to mask their underperformance, or it could also be taken as they're completely unaware of their underperformance. The manager took advantage of that particular situation, asking them what is making you so hectic and how can I help you out? That way, let me know and I'm here to help you out. And by that point, it was more towards the target that we had was probably too unrealistic. Even though we tried to change it based on the pandemic, still it seems to be too unrealistic. So it seemed like the team member was coming with an excuse one after the other, or they're completely blunt of the situation. That's where the manager would have to come with the data points. This is what we have done, data comparison, not with a fellow team member per se by name, but more like within the team. This is what we are realistically agreed upon, and this is how the other team members are able to perform, versus here, giving them more of a data to help them see why we see that you might not be fully performing to your full capabilities. And upon opening up that conversation, the team member was more inclined towards accepting it. We also try to think about what we do if the team member is not going to accept it. How will we make them understand that this is really the case? But in this case, it was more like, okay, if it is the case, they were more worried about what everyone else would think about them. Will the team members would see me as not performing properly, or will the fellow team members of the counterparts would consider me to be not fully capable? That was more of their concern. And that's where the manager would have to provide them feedback that it's completely confidential. No one is going to think anything wrong about you as long as you're trying to be a part of this program and help yourself grow. So key points was 1, either trying to hide or be completely blunt of the situation. 2, worried about how the fellow team members would see them. And 3 was providing upfront data to really help them understand.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think especially with, expressives, to go back to Carolyn's point as well, just showing the data and the facts is really helpful to push that message home. So awesome. Does anybody else have anything to share regarding the scenarios? I know we're close at time, so if anybody wants to.
This is something, yeah, this is something I can do in a small MR, but something we spoke about right in the beginning of the call, and is maybe changing the page name to change in performance. And my thinking was that we don't label underperformance immediately, but that when you start that discussion, you're ready to say, I'm concerned about your performance, but you don't know what's going on yet. So that was one small thing we spoke about, that I can include it in an MR and we can take it from there.
Yeah, I love that, because I think, underperformance does have maybe not a negative connotation, but it can strike, fear if you have that one-to-one and you hear the word underperformance. Can be tough. So thanks, Nadia. Awesome. Does anybody want to share any stories of addressing underperformance from their time at GitLab or at another career that could be beneficial to the group? I know we did that in the issue, but I know we're at 2 minutes at time, so if people can stay over, if you have to drop, feel free to drop, but if you'd like to stay on and talk through.
I'll just say from like a PvP perspective, because I see a lot and talk a lot with managers about underperformance in their teams. Sometimes there's a tendency to avoid those difficult conversations because they're hard and uncomfortable. But hopefully, if you better understand your team member's style and you have this foundation with some trust, you can have them more easily. And I would say address performance concerns earlier. Then wait until you have like a ton of different examples that have kind of piled up over time. It's easier for folks to course correct, and it's beneficial to the team member, even though it may feel really uncomfortable and they may leave the conversation upset. It's beneficial to have them earlier than wait. That's just my one comment.
Definitely. Yeah, I think somebody posted in the challenge just a story about how they gave somebody feedback during their annual review when underperformance was occurring before, and it took the team member by surprise. I think if underperformance is an issue, you have to hit it head on, and it's not easy. It's definitely not. So cool.
Josh, I'll second what
yeah.
Carolyn was saying. I do think as leaders, we do tend to have that hesitancy. But I have had an experience here where I highlighted underperformance and the team member was almost thankful for being seen, you know, because we work so remotely, sometimes they don't feel like their work is being reviewed and understood at an in-depth level. And so just to have their manager say, no, I have been looking at what you're doing and I have some places where I think you can improve, was like highlights to them in their ability to grow. So sometimes those conversations, you can think that they will go in one direction, and a team member can surprise you and go in a totally different direction with it.
Definitely. And I think like just having that conversation, like those are very impactful for your long-term career. So like just reflecting on that feedback. So cool. So if anybody needs a drop, feel free to. I know there's some questions in the doc. I'm happy to extend. I'd love to answer some of these questions.
Put in there is, I agree. I've made the mistake in the past of waiting too late to have those conversations. I think I'm finding myself in today's times of, am I pushing too much? Are the expectations too high relative to everything else going on? I'm just curious of how's everybody else managing that conversation when you've got some folks that are having challenges, but you yourself is like, all right, are the expectations reasonable?
Anybody want to take that?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Josh.
No, I was just going to say, I think like, just being at GitLab for only like 5 months, coming from a very corporate consulting, high-paced environment, I will say that GitLab operates just as fast in some ways and very intense, even though these are like unprecedented times. And I think our leadership has taken some pretty good, steps to help people, like, take time off, friends and family. But I think like as managers, I think it's always just good to be cognizant of that. I definitely think like it feels like business as usual at GitLab. And I'm sure everybody kind of feels that, even though there's, we're all like doubly isolated, right? With COVID and, working remotely, it's kind of like 10x our isolation factor. So I think definitely being aware of that. So.
And I'll also drop a link in. We, the PvP team updated some guidance for how to have those conversations during all of these unprecedented times. And I think it is truly about transparency. So really encouraging your team members to tell you what they need and what you can do to help support them. For some who are like, managing school and kids, they may need you to take things off their plate. And we can talk about, how to structure that. Some may need some more formal time off, like a leave of some sort, whereas some are just, home and have no kids and maybe want to dive deeper into different projects and pick up more work. So it's really about having those transparent conversations. And I think it's important to do it often, because I think with the world and the state of everything, things are changing. Someone who was fine last week may be like facing fires this week. And so it's kind of an ever evolving check-in. So I just recommend that you continue to do that as part of your one-on-ones and pick up on those nonverbal cues too, if you can. I know it's hard over video, but.
I just want to add to what you said, Carol. I think it's important that doing it often, because doing it suddenly doesn't seem as authentic and it doesn't build trust. So when you suddenly want to have these, emotionally rooted conversations to find out who your team members are, learn more about them, you can't rush that process and do it all within a window of, 24 to 48 hours and talk about, performance enablement in the same time. It really just takes away the authenticity and it just makes people more in fear. So that psychological safety piece starts showing up. So just something to consider.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Also, Carolyn and Candace and David. So one thing from experience at GitLab, what I've seen as well is that sometimes setting the expectation is a big relief for team members, because then they know, even if that's an adjusted expectation, right? Not evaluating somebody maybe at 100% performance, but at a reduced performance, that's a big relief, because with these times it's super hard, and sometimes team members are trying to do things which are simply impossible, right? Combining home situation with other situations, and then definitely having that expectation conversation can be a huge relief to team members. And I didn't expect that in some cases, but I think in almost all the cases I've seen at GitLab, that has helped. So I think that's the positive on setting the expectation and having those ongoing conversations about how people are doing or team members are doing.
One last thing I was going to say, I apologize, is, you know, in the chat I had said the enablement piece, and it is important. So when you talk about words, Nadia, as you had mentioned earlier, and how we, you know, naming the page as versus, you know, underperformance and using change as, you know, those words mean everything, regardless, I think, of social styles, but words really change the emotion and the takeaway from it. So saying enablement as an example, and you're putting someone on something to improve their performance, really changes to me how they receive it. That's just subjective, but you know, I don't know what the group thinks, but enablement is very key, that you're setting someone up for success versus you're not doing well and this is the process to get you out the door.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that applies both to underperformance and what Ruth was just talking about. Like we're gonna enable you to be successful by setting the right expectations for you and making sure that we're all transparent about what those expectations are.
So I just had one question from one of my teammates as well. So this is regarding social styles itself. So I actually shared this with my team, and we had this discussion today during our team meeting. And one thing that there were a few concerns raised about social styles itself, right? Like, are we actually grouping people, or what if like I exhibit some other, I mean, I'm not always exhibiting the same kind of things. Like, it totally depends on various other factors as well, maybe like what I'm going through and stuff like that. And so that was one question that was raised. And the second one was about, would this affect my career growth in any way? Like, do we actually consider this when we consider someone for maybe a manager? So would this come into picture? So these are a few questions that were there in the minds of my teammates as well. So yeah, maybe we should clarify these very well in the handbook is what I thought.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's feedback we've gotten as well. Like, I think the last thing is we don't want anybody to feel like typecasted into a social style. Like, if you're an expressive, that's who you are to your core. No, this is just a tool to help people facilitate conversations. It's not the end all be all. I think because we work remotely, there's less time to get to know one another. And it's just one of the many tools out there to facilitate that. So definitely going to update the handbook. And then I don't think social styles plays into promotion or anything. It's definitely, it's more for managers and team members to use to communicate better. So, but that's great. That's an interesting question. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, and I know something we talked about, Josh, before too, was like also not having people use it as a crutch. Like, oh, I'm acting this way because I like in a way that may not be acceptable because I'm expressive or I'm a driver or whatever. Like, you also can't use it as a crutch because yeah. So
yeah, definitely.
It's not an excuse for behavior.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. So I know folks are dropping. I hope everybody found the session useful. We'll send some feedback forms tomorrow. Thank you so much. This is week 1 of the challenge, and we will continue to provide some great learnings to you all. So thank you for attending and participating.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right.
Great work. Great work. Bye-bye.
Bye now. Thanks, Candace.